Welcome to this Houdini notebook tutorial. This video is part of the lighting notebook, and the node that we're looking at in this video is simply the light node. Once again, we're going to switch this to the Solaris desktop just because we are going to be working at the stage level. So we go over to the stage level over here, and this is all that we have. It's just a very simple scene, just a convenient scene to have to experiment with. So if we take a look at the top over here, you'll see that we have a point light, spotlight, area light, geometry light, distant light, environment light, and a calmer physical sky. Now, many of these are actually a preset of the same light. All we have to do in here is just type light, and you'll see this one over here. When we place it by default, it will be a point light. So if we just bring this up, you'll see that that is just a point light, right? So it's just a point in space that emits light. Over here, we have a type, and we can change this type. So if we were to change this to something like a cylinder, then we'll have a cylinder that represents our light. And now it might not be obvious until it intersects something. So you can see over here, that point of intersection is in the shape of a cylinder. And if you actually do want to see the geometry that this is creating for this light, you can go over here to Calmer, go down to the bottom over here where it says Render Light Geometry, Set or Create, and enable it. So now you can actually see that we have this cylinder. And this is actually what is going to be emitting our light. So if we switch this to a disk light, you'll see that it creates a one-sided disk. And again, if we go over to the Calmer tab, we also have an option over here for single-sided. By default, it's on. If we switch it off, you'll see that this is now two-sided. So single-sided, just like that. Then we also have these other ones. We have a sphere and we have a rectangle light. So this is just going to be your general area light. If you were to type area light, this is what it would create, right? A rectangle light. Now with this one over here, you do have options over here to increase things like height and width, but some of the more useful settings will be over on the shaping tab over here. For example, if we were to switch this to a spotlight, we can reduce the angle in which light is emitted. And if I just increase the exposure over here, it'll be more obvious as to what this is doing. So as you can see, we reduce the angle and it changes the angle of the cone in which we're emitting light. Softness you can think of as a blurring factor so that the light isn't so sharp towards the edges. If we increase this, you'll see that we end up with that sort of thing, where the light is quite soft towards these edges, but the brightest area tends towards the center, and so you end up with this really bright area towards the center of the cone. We also have barn dooring for left, right, top, and bottom. This can just be thought of as a barn door. So as we open and close this, it will cut off the light. So I'm going to reduce the softness on this and just increase this angle to 180. Also just going to reset the rotations so that this works more accurately. And let's just go ahead and increase the left barn door. You'll start to see that it's almost as if a panel is appearing over here. That's rotating and flapping and closing off the light on that end. We can do the same thing over here, where we have a right barn door. So like this, we have finer control, right? So if we set our angle to something like 180, we end up with finer control if we use these barn door settings. You can do the same thing with the top if you don't want light escaping so far above the top. You can make a narrower light, just like that. Now, focus is going to work similarly to a spotlight in that it's going to focus our light in. It also does some sort of softening in the same way that the spotlight has softness, but we also end up with a focus tint. So what this is going to do is it's going to tint the light wherever it falls further out towards these lower values, right? So if we go over here and just give it a tint and then reduce this back down, you'll see that the dimmer areas now have this color to them, right? So that might be useful for something like a television where you want a slightly blue light that has a bit of a fall off to it, right? Something like that. The last one over here, IES, is really useful for developing interesting looking lights. Now, for this to work, you're going to have to find an IES file. And to get an IES profile, you can go online and there is an IES library. So if you just search IES profiles, you'll find this IES library over here. And all of these are free to download. As you can see, we have all of these IES profiles to choose from. Now, whichever one you choose is going to have the profile that is shown in these images. So let's go ahead and just take this one over here. We can just download the IES for it. Right, once it's done, it's going to save as just this long string of letters and numbers .ies. Then once you have an IES light profile, you can simply select it over here. And this is what you end up with, right? So as you can see, we have this IES light that has some shaping to it. Now, I would recommend changing this to a point light. This gives you a better result when you're using an IES light. So that's the kind of look that we end up with. The cool thing is you can also change the angle of the IES. So you can either widen it by reducing the scale or have it tighten up by increasing the scale. Right, so that's just an interesting way to work with your lights. As for the rest of the settings, we can just think of intensity as a linear scaling factor for our lights. So as we push this up, a difference between 1 and 2 is the same as a difference between 2 and 3. But when it comes to exposure, exposure is going to be an exponential increase in our light brightness. So a value increase of 1 to 2 is not going to be the same as, say, 2 to 3. And exposure works as a multiplier of intensity. So if we set intensity to 0, exposure won't do anything. If we set this to 1, we can then use this as a multiplier for our intensity. Additionally, an exposure of 0 allows us to just use our intensity like this. As for color, this just allows us to give a color to our light. A color temperature is going to have warmer colors towards the low end and cooler colors towards the high end. So we're going to move closer towards blue and white as we go up higher in color temperature, as you can see over there. And we're going to come down towards red and orange, towards the lower ends. If you want daylight, it's going to be around 5,000, so we can do 5,500. If you want something like a candle, that's going to be closer to 2,000, something like that. We also have some multipliers for our diffuse and specular. So this is just going to affect how much this particular light affects your diffuse or your specular. So if we decrease this, you'll see that it only affects our specular highlights. If we decrease this, it won't affect our specular, only our diffuse. Now, as for light filters, generally you'll just use a light filter library, but this can go after your lights. So we're not going to worry about it in this video, but the idea is that over here, you would just say assign to light. You would put / whichever light you want to apply it to. So light 1, go inside, and you can add different types of filters. So we have all of these over here. For example, a barn door will do exactly what we just saw, but something like a filter will change the color of the light, right? So you can see over there, we're adding a gel over our light, and it gives us control over things like saturation and gamma and all of this. It also allows us to control it through parameters that we define inside of this Vex builder, so we can use all sorts of nodes to actually influence this. So that's all for this part. I hope that this helped you. I realized that this light node is actually a little bit more involved than I originally thought. So there is quite a bit that you can do with it. That's why I felt like it deserved an entire video of its own. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.